The arrest at 6:12 a.m. It was just past 6 in the morning when the stillness of the neighborhood was pierced by the sound of tires on wet pavement. Elmwood Street was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. Rows of identical houses, sleepy dogs on porches, and curtains drawn at nightfall. People knew each other by first names or by habits. The jogger at 7 a.m., the retired Marine watering his lawn. But the most quietly consistent presence was always Helen Dorrans, 83 years old, wore the same wool coat every winter, fed birds in her yard, gave out peppermint candies to kids. No one could remember when she moved in, only that she always been there, a soft-spoken widow with a tremble in her hands and a cane with a brass eagle on the handle. She was kindness personified. Until that morning, 2 unmarked black SUVs pulled up in front of her home. Neighbors peeked through blinds and cracked doors. A pair of agents in suits emerged. No police uniforms, no flashing lights, just silence and precision. They walked up the porch steps and knocked. Helen opened the door slowly. She didn't look surprised. That, some would say later, was the strangest part. There were no screams, no resistance. She stepped outside in her slippers, holding nothing but her cane and a folded piece of paper. They placed her gently in the back seat. The car drove off. People expected her to return that afternoon. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, maybe her medication, maybe someone had mistaken her for another elderly woman. But she didn't come back that night. They took Mrs. Dorrans. By noon, whispers filled the block. Maggie Jensen, who walked her golden retriever every morning past Helen's house, told everyone she saw her taken away like a criminal. Old Mr. Klein from across the street said he saw one of the agents flash a federal badge. Not police, federal. Rumors began to swirl. Maybe she had debts. Maybe it was elder abuse. She might be senile. Maybe she forgot to pay taxes or something. You know, she was always a bit strange. By 6 p.m., someone had placed a tiny candle on her porch, and then another. By morning, there were 11. No one had answers, no arrest records, no public statements. The local police said they couldn't comment. A FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, request submitted by a local journalist was denied within 48 hours, classified for national security reasons. National security? Of all the phrases someone could associate with Helen Dorrans, threat to national security was the last anyone would imagine. The house left untouched. Days passed. The blinds remained down. The mail piled up. No relatives came. The garden dried. Kids stopped riding their bikes near her home. Adults whispered across fences, eyes scanning for more black cars. The silence became heavier with each passing day. Something was wrong, and no one knew what. The note. On the 4th morning, a storm rolled through the town. By late afternoon, a gust of wind knocked over the mailbox in front of Helen's home. Mrs. Green, a retired teacher, came over to fix it. As she did, she noticed something wedged under the welcome mat, the folded piece of paper Helen had been holding when she was taken. Carefully, she opened it. The words were handwritten, steady. "Do not believe everything they will tell you. I've always protected this country, even from itself." That was all it said. No signature, no date. Who was she, really? The letter hit the local Facebook group that evening. Theories exploded. Former military? FBI informant? Whistleblower? One user posted, "I work in public records. Her birth name isn't Helen Dorrans. It was Helena K. Doransky. She changed it in 1979. The post was removed minutes later. The user deleted their account the next morning. The atmosphere shifts. A week after the arrest, life tried to go on, but it couldn't. Her house became a symbol. Some neighbors treated it like a haunted place. Others lit candles every evening. Nobody had seen the agents again. No one had answers. And no one could shake the question. What could a frail old woman possibly know that was worth hiding? Everyone had once overlooked her. a harmless old woman in a house with peeling paint and rose bushes. But now, the quietest person in the neighborhood had become its loudest mystery. The woman everyone thought they knew. For as long as Elmwood Street could remember, Helen Dorrans was just there, present in the quietest ways. She wasn't the kind of neighbor who attended block parties or spoke at community meetings, but she remembered birthdays. She left hand-knitted scarves on porches during cold winters. When the Thompson's son returned from deployment, she baked him lemon bars. No one asked her to. Her kindness was quiet, understated, but it was never forgotten. So when she disappeared, was taken, the neighborhood felt something deeper than confusion. It felt betrayal. Because if even Helen had something to hide, then what did that say about everyone else? Memories begin to shift. Mrs. Green, the retired teacher, was the first to admit it. I always thought Helen looked tired, not in a physical sense, just soul-tired, like someone carrying weight no one else could see. She recalled how Helen once stopped her from mailing a letter during a heat wave, saying only, "That address doesn't exist anymore. You shouldn't send it." Mrs. Green had laughed it off. Now it didn't feel funny. Patterns in the past. A few neighbors began to compare notes. She never used a cell phone. Her mail was always delivered, but she never seemed to send anything. No one remembered seeing family visit, not once. Her house had no visible internet, no satellite dish. She burned her trash instead of leaving it on the curb. Strange, but not strange enough to question. Until now, the forgotten interview. In the back of a yearbook from 1992, a student had once interviewed Helen for a local heroes segment. She had been the librarian at a nearby public school for 6 years before retiring. "I've always believed that silence is a kind of armor," the quote read. "Some people wear medals, others wear quiet." Nobody remembered that yearbook until Jake, now in his 30s and working in data recovery, dug it out of his parents' attic. An unexpected phone call. Jake posted the yearbook page to the town's Facebook group. It spread like wildfire. That night, his mother's landline rang. The voice was calm, male, almost polite. "Take that post down, Jake. Who is this? You're looking in places that have been buried for a reason." Click. When he called the number back, it was disconnected. He removed the post. Something in the attic. Jake wasn't done. Something about that voice, the precision of it. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like someone accustomed to ending things, quickly and quietly. 2 days later, Jake knocked on Helen's front door. No answer, of course, but curiosity, maybe guilt, pushed him further. He noticed the side window had been cracked since the storm. He slipped inside. The house smelled of cedar and lavender. Everything was in its place, dustless, like someone still lived there, but it was what he found upstairs that would haunt him, the drawer that didn't belong. In the attic, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, was a locked drawer. It wasn't attached to anything, just an old metal drawer, like the kind found in filing cabinets from decades past. Jake forced it open. Inside, a stack of black and white photographs, most featuring Helen, decades younger, often standing next to serious-looking men in military uniforms. One had her shaking hands with a US president, though the date and event weren't listed. A small notebook written in Cyrillic script. A worn leather patch with a strange insignia, an eagle flying upside down holding a broken sword. And at the very bottom, an ID badge from 1974 with her face and a different name. Helena K. Doransky Agency, Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. The precursor to the CIA, a revelation that burns. Jake barely had time to photograph a few items before his phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Jake, you're not supposed to be there." He froze. The attic window was shut. The room had no line of sight. No one should have known. He ran. By the time he returned with a friend 20 minutes later, the attic had been cleared. The floorboard, nailed shut, only the faint smell of burned paper remained, a neighborhood questioning itself. Elmwood Street was changing. The more people learned, the more they realized how little they ever truly knew her. Some questioned their own memories. Others wondered if they'd ever really looked at her at all. "How do you live next to someone for decades?" one neighbor asked, "and never realize they might be part of history?" Sometimes the people we overlook the most are the ones who carry entire chapters of history in silence. Helen Dorrans didn't hide her past. She just waited for the world to stop assuming they knew who she was. The files that shouldn't exist. Jake hadn't slept much in days. Ever since Helen was taken away, the air in the neighborhood felt different, heavier, as if some invisible thread had been cut and no one had realized how much it had been holding together. Her home remained silent, no lights on, mail piling up, curtains unmoved. Jake couldn't stop thinking about her last glance, her lips moving without sound as the officers took her away. And then came the phone call. It wasn't from a friend or even from the police. It was from a voice he didn't recognize, calm, measured, and cold. "Check her attic," the voice said, "before someone else does." Jake froze. "Who is this?" But the line was dead. He stared at his phone, heart pounding. Was it a prank? But it didn't feel like one. It felt like a warning. He waited until nightfall. Then, like a thief in his own neighborhood, Jake slipped around the back of Helen's house. He had kept her spare key. She once gave it to him, in case something ever happens. It had been a joke at the time, but now, as he slipped it into the lock, it felt more like destiny. The house welcomed him with silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that carries memory and weight. Every step on the wooden floor seemed to echo louder than it should. He passed by the armchair where she used to read, the little wooden table with the fading mug ring, the scent of lavender and thyme. He found the attic door behind a closet. It groaned as he pulled it down. Dust rained, cobwebs clung, the ladder extended. Up he went. The attic was darker than he expected, the kind of darkness that swallows sound. Jake waved his flashlight across the room. Boxes, books, old holiday decorations, nothing strange at first, until he saw the trunk. It was large, heavy, covered in faded stickers from countries Jake didn't recognize. Some had foreign writing, Cyrillic, Arabic, maybe German. The lock was rusty but snapped open with a single tug. Inside were files, hundreds of them, neatly labeled, black folders, all bearing the same strange insignia, an inverted eagle clutching a broken sword. Jake frowned. His flashlight beam shook slightly. He picked up a folder marked Operation Lilith, 1983, Athens. The contents were unreal. Photos of men in suits and uniforms, diagrams of buildings, reports written in cryptic shorthand. Some were in English, others weren't. One paper had a seal that read, "Eyes Only, Tier 4 Classification." Jake sat back. His mind raced. This wasn't some family keepsake. These were government-level documents, intelligence files, the kind that aren't supposed to exist outside bunkers and locked vaults. Who was she? He grabbed a smaller envelope labeled H. Lambert, codename Lark. Inside was a faded ID card. Jake's breath caught in his throat. It was Helen, but not the Helen he knew. This version of her had short, dark hair, sharper features, a steely gaze. She wore what looked like a foreign diplomatic uniform with pins that bore the same eagle insignia. The ID was dated 1979. Field Agent, Division Epsilon, clearance level Red Echo. Jake's hands trembled. Helen, sweet Helen, was a spy. And not just any spy. From the language and stamps, she seemed to have worked for some kind of multinational intelligence division, something not publicly known. He tried to take a photo of the badge with his phone. It wouldn't focus. The image blurred. Every time. Almost like something in the ink interfered with digital devices. Jake began taking notes instead. writing everything down, folder by folder. Many of the reports involved covert interventions, interrogations, and psychological warfare. Helen's name, codename Lark, appeared repeatedly. One page mentioned an extraction from East Berlin, another, a mission in Tehran. One chilling document had a list titled "Necessary Silence, Individuals Retired." Helen had initialed several lines. Jake stared at the page, sick to his stomach. Retired wasn't retirement. It was a euphemism. Helen had taken lives. She'd saved them too. One file detailed her extracting a defecting scientist and his family from Budapest under sniper fire. Another described her efforts in dismantling a rogue espionage ring within their own ranks. But what was she doing here? Why hide in a quiet American neighborhood? Why bake cookies and knit scarves after that kind of life? And then, one last file, at the bottom of the trunk. It was red, unlike the others. On the cover, "Final assignment, Dandelion." It was dated 1994, just months before Helen moved into this neighborhood. Jake opened it slowly. It wasn't a mission report. It was a letter, typed with Helen's signature at the bottom. "If you are reading this, I am no longer the person they knew. I have buried the names, the memories, and the tools, not out of shame, but to protect them. There are things people should never carry into peace. I did what I had to. I don't seek forgiveness, just understanding." Jake sat in the attic, surrounded by secrets that had once shaped nations. The woman who watered her garden every morning had once changed the course of history, and now she was gone, in handcuffs. But for what? None of the files explained why she'd been arrested, who found out, what they knew. Jake knew one thing: if someone had come for Helen, they could come for him next. He locked the attic and made a copy of every file. The day the agents returned, the neighborhood had barely begun to forget. A few weeks had passed since Helen Lambert. Miss Helen, to most, was taken away in that quiet, chilling arrest. Rumors came and went, like wind on dry leaves. Some said it was a mistake. Others whispered about money laundering or old debts, but no one really knew. Jake did. He knew more than he wanted to. The files in the attic had revealed a version of Helen that was almost impossible to reconcile with the sweet, slow-moving elderly woman who handed out handmade scarves every Christmas. The cold, clinical reports in those folders told the story of a woman who had seen war, moved between continents with false identities, negotiated with enemies, and, in some cases, eliminated them. Still, something didn't sit right. Why now? Why would an intelligence agency come after someone who had clearly disappeared from the game decades ago? What threat could she possibly pose now? Jake had a bad feeling it wasn't about her past. It was about something she still knew, or something she still had. He kept the digital copies hidden across multiple USB drives. Paranoid? Maybe. But the more he read, the more dangerous it felt. Some of those names and operations were likely still classified. He stopped sleeping properly. Every sound at night made him flinch. The squeak of the mailbox, the distant click of a lighter, even the wind brushing tree branches against the window felt loaded with tension. Then came the morning they returned. Jake noticed the car first. It didn't belong to anyone in the neighborhood. A gray sedan with no plates, not even temporary ones. It was parked just far enough to look casual, just close enough to feel wrong. Two men stepped out. Black suits, neutral expressions, movements too precise to be anything but trained. One tall, built like a tower. The other smaller but with sharp eyes that never stopped scanning. They walked up to Helen's front door without hesitation. Jake crouched behind his curtains and watched. They didn't knock. They had a key. The door opened smoothly. They entered and didn't close it all the way behind them. Jake's heart thundered. He didn't know what he was supposed to do. Call the police? And say what? That two men in suits entered the home of a woman who'd just been arrested by other people in suits. This wasn't a crime you could explain. Instead, he waited. 20 minutes passed, then 40. The men exited, calm and empty-handed. Jake noticed one of them glance toward his house, right at his window. It was only for a second, but it felt like being pierced. He stepped back, breathed deeply, told himself to stay cool. But the thoughts raced. Did they know he had the files? Did Helen tell them about him? Or were they just watching? Later that night, after pacing endlessly, Jake couldn't take it anymore. He went back to Helen's house, to the attic. Everything was gone. The trunk, the folders, even the cobwebs felt disturbed. They had cleared it out, but they had missed something. In the corner of the attic, behind a loose panel in the wall, Jake found a small black journal. Leather-bound, no title, tucked so carefully that only someone who had seen her do it would know to look there. He opened it and froze. This wasn't a journal of records, it was a journal of regret. They told me the mission was over, that I was no longer useful. I believed them, until they showed up at my door 10 years later. Not to thank me, but to erase me. I told them I had burned everything. I lied. She had written pages and pages, not about her missions, but about how they treated her afterward, how she had been betrayed by her own agency, abandoned, marked as a liability, monitored for years. She had survived 2 accidents already, one in 1997. Her brakes mysteriously failed. Another in 2005, a gas leak that never made it into any report. Jake turned the pages feverishly. I kept the red file because I knew one day someone would come, not for me, but for what I saw, for what I recorded in '87. If they find it, they'll bury everything. Jake looked at the back of the journal. Inside was a piece of film, old, fragile. He held it up to the light and saw a sequence of frames. Men in uniform, standing around a table, maps, weapons. One man circled in red ink. Underneath it, he wasn't supposed to be there. Jake didn't recognize him, but something about the face felt familiar. Not because he'd seen it before, but because it was the kind of face that appears in headlines. Powerful, untouchable. Helen had captured something. Maybe an off-the-books meeting, maybe a crime, maybe something worse. And now they were scrubbing her past clean. Jake put the film back in the journal. This was bigger than he thought, and if they knew what she left behind, he might be next. He needed help, but not from the police, not from anyone who'd just called this conspiracy theory nonsense. There had to be someone from Helen's world still out there, someone who owed her. The journal had one more thing, a phone number, no name, just 3 words, call if cornered. Jake picked up his old landline phone and dialed. It rang once, twice. Click. A voice answered, female, calm, low. This line is monitored. Say the phrase. Jake's mouth went dry. He flipped to the front of the journal. There, on the inside cover, written in Helen's delicate handwriting, the owl watches when no one else does. He spoke it. The line went silent. Then, "You're Helen's contact?" Jake didn't know how to answer, but the voice didn't wait. "Get out of the house. You're already being watched." The call ended, and Jake, still holding the journal, felt something cold run down his spine. The contact. Jake had never been good with fear. He wasn't brave by nature, and he knew it. He preferred puzzles to confrontation, quiet to noise. But that call, those words, had stirred something inside him he didn't know he had. "Get out of the house. You're already being watched." There was no time to double-check, no time to grab clothes or explanations. He stuffed the journal and the film strip into his backpack and walked out the back door, locking it out of habit. The night was quiet. Too quiet. He didn't look back. He walked for blocks without stopping, past empty porches, flickering streetlights, and the hum of distant TV screens behind windows. His heart hadn't stopped racing since the phone call. He remembered something Helen once said to him on her porch years ago. "There's a difference between being paranoid and being prepared, sweetheart. The first one gets you labeled. The second one keeps you alive. At the time, he thought she was just being eccentric. Now it felt like gospel. He reached the 24-hour diner on the edge of town, Maggie's place. It was nearly empty, just a trucker at the counter and an elderly man asleep in a booth. Jake slid into the back corner, facing the door. He ordered coffee he wouldn't drink and took out the journal again. There were no more phone numbers, no more clues, except one. At the back of the journal, in small, faded ink, was an address. Rose and 7th, apartment 3C, no buzz, knock 3 times. He looked it up. That building had been condemned a decade ago. Of course it had, but Jake had come too far to turn back. The building on Rose and 7th. At sunrise, the street was barely awake. Trash bins lined the cracked sidewalks, and the apartment complex loomed like a forgotten relic. Bricks chipped, windows boarded, and vines growing wild up the side like nature was reclaiming it. Jake hesitated. Everything about this screamed, "Don't go in," but he knocked once, twice, 3 times, nothing. Then, quietly, the door creaked open, just a few inches, a sliver of light, then a shadow, a woman's voice. "You shouldn't have come here, but since you did, get inside, quickly." Jake entered without thinking. She closed the door behind him, bolted it, 3 locks. Who was she? She didn't offer a name. At first, tall, thin, maybe in her 70s, white hair pulled tight into a bun, a presence that felt sharp, controlled, like a coiled spring. Jake could feel her sizing him up like a threat and finding him disappointingly harmless. He placed the journal gently on the table, her eyes locked on it. "I told Helen to burn that." "She didn't," Jake said, "and now she's gone." A long pause. The woman sat down, looked tired for the first time. Gone how? Arrested. No charges, no phone call, just disappeared. The woman didn't seem surprised. Saddened, yes, but not shocked. "They always come back for unfinished business." Jake leaned forward. "Who are they?" "People who don't officially exist." She finally introduced herself. "My name's Miriam. I was Helen's handler from 1966 to 1979. Jake blinked. "You were in intelligence?" She smirked slightly. "I was intelligence. The real Helen." Over weak coffee and closed blinds, Miriam told Jake things he couldn't believe, and yet somehow already knew. Helen Lambert had been recruited at 22 while working as a translator for a diplomatic mission in Berlin. Her aptitude for languages, memory, and calm under pressure had caught someone's eye. By 25, she was fluent in 7 languages and deep in black operations. She wasn't a killer, Miriam insisted, not in the traditional sense. She gathered information, extracted assets, prevented wars no one ever heard about. But in 1987, something changed. She was sent to document a meeting between American and Eastern intelligence officials, off the books, in a third country. It was supposed to be a negotiation. Jake nodded. But it wasn't. Miriam shook her head. It was a cover-up. A cleanup, really. An asset had gone rogue, knew too much. They wanted plausible deniability. Helen had recorded the entire thing. She thought it would be used as leverage, insurance. But once she saw who was in the room, she realized it was bigger than that. Senators, CEOs, even foreign diplomats. Jake felt cold again. She stole the footage. She disappeared, Miriam corrected. Faked her death, changed her name, started over in a town no one would look twice at. Until now. Why they came back. Jake showed her the film strip. Miriam's face went pale. "I thought she destroyed that. She said she would. Why would she lie? Because she stopped trusting everyone, even me. I don't blame her." Jake asked the question that had been haunting him. Why now? Why would they come after her now? Miriam didn't hesitate. Because one of the men in that photo is about to be appointed Director of National Intelligence in 4 days. Silence. Jake stared at her, trying to process what that meant. The man circled in red was about to control the entire US intelligence network. If that photo surfaces, Miriam said, it'll destroy him and everyone tied to him. Jake felt the weight of it. Helen hadn't kept the evidence to protect herself. She kept it to protect the country, even after everything they did to her. A choice. Jake felt overwhelmed. He was just a high school teacher, a neighbor, a curious man with too much empathy. But now the question was no longer, what happened to Miss Helen? It was, what do I do with what she left me? Miriam slid a phone toward him. I still have one contact in the press, the kind that still believes in the truth. And the danger, Jake asked. You're already in it, she said. Might as well decide who you want to be in it. Jake took the phone and made the call. Jake hadn't slept. Not really. After leaving Miriam's apartment, his mind spun in a loop of questions. How had his life turned from lesson plans and late-night grading into espionage and moral crisis in less than a week? He stared out the window of a borrowed room, a safe house, Miriam called it, though it felt like a waiting room before a storm. The journal sat on the table, the film strip carefully sealed in a plastic sleeve, untouched since he last held it in the diner. He checked the time. 8:14 a.m. In 46 minutes, he would be sitting across from the one man who could take this story public, if he survived the day, the journalist. I haven't used my real name in 5 years, the man said, sliding into the booth across from Jake. But you can call me Davis, everyone does. They met at a diner downtown, halfway between nowhere and everywhere. Davis wore a worn canvas jacket and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't bring a notebook. Didn't need to. Jake slid the film strip toward him like it was explosive. You can't make copies of that, Jake said. Wouldn't dream of it, Davis replied. But Jake didn't miss the tiny scanner clipped to his belt. He was careful, but not naive. Why now? Davis asked, squinting at the strip. This name, this man, they've been ghosts for decades. Jake told him everything, the arrest, the journal, Miriam, the address, and the photo of the soon-to-be intelligence chief sitting across from people who weren't supposed to exist. Davis leaned back, whistling softly. If this is real, he said, it's not just a story, it's a warhead. The implications. That one frame of film, the one with the man circled in red, was the center of it all. In 1987, he was still a mid-level diplomatic attaché. But over the years, he rose like smoke, quietly, consistently, unquestioned, and now he stood at the brink of unprecedented power. Jake couldn't help but think of Helen, of her choosing silence all these years. Why now? Why leave it in his hands? Davis confirmed his fears. If we run this story, we'll be hunted, discredited, labeled traitors. But if we don't, Jake said, he becomes untouchable. Davis studied him. You're not a reporter. You're not a spy. Why are you doing this? Jake hesitated, then said quietly, because someone I cared about trusted me with the truth, and I refuse to let her be erased. The deal. They needed more than a photo. Luckily, they had it. Miriam, having risked her own safety, delivered the tape. A single cassette, weathered, labeled only 87C Black. They digitized it, she told Jake. But this is the original. Analog. Off the grid. Jake handed it to Davis with a silent prayer. The journalist listened to just enough to pale. We'll need multiple releases, Davis said. Offshore servers, redundant uploads, anonymous whistleblowers. Jake didn't understand all the logistics, but he understood this. There was no going back. The push. The release went live at midnight. A small, encrypted site, known only to a handful of independent journalists, posted the full contents, footage, transcripts, historical context. Then someone leaked it to an underground network on the dark web. Then it hit Reddit. Then X, formerly Twitter. Then national television. Within 12 hours it had been viewed 4.3 million times. Within 24 hours, the man in the photo had resigned his nomination. By 48 hours, he was under federal investigation. Jake watched it unfold, not from a safe house, but from Helen's porch. Alone, the cost. They never found Helen, not officially. Her name was never mentioned in the press, no obituary, no court date. It was as if she'd been erased by the very system she once served. But Jake knew better. One day a package arrived for him. No return address. Inside, a Polaroid of a quiet beach far from the US. And on the back, in her handwriting, "Thank you for remembering who I was." Jake didn't cry, but he did sit on her old porch swing and let the silence wrap around him like a warm coat. He wasn't a hero. He was a bridge. The letter. Jake found it on a Wednesday. The envelope was slipped between 2 pages of Helen's US journal, the one with coded entries and quiet rage. He hadn't noticed it before, maybe because it hadn't been there, or maybe because it waited for the right moment to be found. The envelope was small, yellowed, sealed with a faded wax stamp cracked down the middle. His name was handwritten on the front, just Jake. His throat tightened as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, creased and trembling with the weight of time. Helen's handwriting, neat, deliberate, and slightly tilted, covered the page. And as he began to read, it felt less like words on paper, and more like her voice, whispering in the quiet of his mind. "If you're reading this, Jake, if you're reading this, it means I trusted you more than I trusted myself. It means I chose not to carry this alone to the grave, a decision I made with more fear than you'll ever know. I've lived many lives. Some I chose. Others were chosen for me, but the name you knew me by, Helen, that one I picked, because it reminded me of the woman I was before the shadows." Jake paused. This wasn't the voice of the stubborn, sharp-tongued woman he knew from the porch. This was someone else. Someone softer, someone wounded, the truth she carried. I wasn't always invisible. Once I sat in rooms with men whose names are now etched in stone. I translated messages that could start or end wars. I witnessed things that never made the news and protected people who never knew I existed. But the price was silence. A silence so deep I forgot the sound of my own truths. Jake could see her now, younger, sharply dressed, carrying briefcases full of codes instead of groceries. He read on. "In 1987, I made a mistake. I believed in someone, trusted him, believed that truth mattered more than protocol. I was wrong. He betrayed everything, and I paid the price. Not with death, that would have been cleaner, but with erasure. The erasure. They came in the night. 2 men, no uniforms, no charges, just silence and cold metal. They erased me, Jake, from the databases, from the files, even from the memory of those I had served beside. I was given a choice, disappear quietly or rot loudly. I chose to rot, but on my terms." Jake blinked hard. He remembered the news headlines from that year. A local elderly woman arrested in a supposed breach of government property. No trial, no context, just an image of Helen, handcuffed, eyes burning with defiance. They left me in that cell for 37 days. No name, no voice, just walls. When they finally let me go, it wasn't because they had a change of heart. It was because they realized keeping me hidden only gave me power. Why she chose Jake. "I've watched you, Jake, not in a creepy way. Don't get nervous." Jake laughed softly through his tears. "I watched how you spoke to the children, how you saw value in the overlooked, how you never once looked at me like I was just anything. I waited a long time for someone who still believed in the truth. Not the polished press conference truth, but the raw, uncomfortable human truth. You reminded me who I was. Not Helen the ghost, but Helen the fighter. The final request. You've done more than I ever asked, and for that I am grateful beyond words. But there is one more truth you deserve to know. Jake's heartbeat quickened. I didn't choose exile. I chose survival, so I could one day pass the match to someone brave enough to strike it. You struck it, Jake. You lit the fire, let it burn. But don't let it consume you. Tell the story. But tell it like a whisper between souls, not a scream into the void. Let the world remember not just the scandal, but the woman I used to be. And when you look up at the stars one night, know I am free. H. Jake's reflection. He read the letter twice, then a third time. Each word sank deeper, carving itself into the quiet corners of his spirit. She wasn't asking for vengeance. Not even justice, just remembrance. Jake knew what he had to do next. He would write her story, not as a tabloid expose, but as a testimony. For students, for the forgotten, for anyone who'd ever been erased. The visit. Jake didn't sleep that night. The letter had stirred something too deep, too old to be calmed by silence. He paced the small living room of Helen S. house, now his, with the letter folded in his pocket and her ghost quietly watching. At least, that's how it felt. There was one sentence that wouldn't leave his mind. Tell the story, but tell it like a whisper between souls. The next morning, he returned to the files, but this time, he wasn't searching for headlines. He was searching for whispers. One name, one clue. Buried in a small index card tucked between the margins of Helen's coded journal, he found a name, written faintly, like it was an afterthought or a risk. W.D., Retired Cryptography Liaison, Annapolis. No full name, no address, just a city. Jake packed a small backpack, folded the letter, and boarded a train heading toward the East Coast. The ride was quiet, heavy with the kind of anticipation that made hours feel like breaths. He didn't know what or who he would find, but he trusted Helen enough to follow the trail, the house by the marsh. Annapolis greeted him with humid air and a sky the color of old linen. Jake took a taxi to the edge of the marshes, following directions from a scribbled envelope Helen had once mailed years ago. It led to a small wooden cottage, weathered by time, nestled between reeds and silence. He hesitated at the porch, then knocked. 3 times. Nothing. But just as he turned to leave, the door opened. An elderly man stood there, tall, wiry, eyes sharp despite the years. He wore a flannel shirt, suspenders, and an expression that suggested he had already guessed who Jake was. "You're Helen's boy," the man said, not as a question. Jake froze. Yes, I guess I am." The man nodded slowly. "Then come in. I've been waiting." W.D. His name was Walter Donnelly. In the 1960s, he had worked as a cryptography liaison between intelligence branches. He'd never held a gun, but he once held secrets worth more than lives. He and Helen had been partners, not romantically, but soul deep in trust, like soldiers in a war without uniforms, and for a time, they had been unstoppable. "She was the best," Walter said, pouring tea with a trembling hand. "Not just brilliant, she had a conscience. That's what made her dangerous." Jake listened, silent. Walter continued. "The mistake wasn't hers, it was mine. I introduced her to someone I thought we could trust. I vouched for him. And when it all fell apart, they came for her. They told me to deny everything, said if I didn't, I'd be next. So I did. And she never blamed me. Not once." The confession. Jake could feel the years of guilt hanging in the room. "She saved lives," Walter said. "In 1972, she intercepted a transmission that would have killed 3 diplomats. She prevented 2 assassination attempts. She broke codes they said were unbreakable. And still, they buried her. Jake opened his backpack, laid the letter on the table. Walter didn't touch it, just stared. "She never stopped believing in you," Jake whispered. Walter's hands trembled, tears filled his eyes. "And I never stopped remembering her." They sat in silence, the kind of silence that forgives but never forgets. The room that stayed locked. Walter led Jake to a small back room in the house. It smelled of cedar and thyme. On the walls, photographs of teams, documents, and a single newspaper clipping, yellowed and barely legible. "They made her disappear," Walter said, "but I kept what I could." On the table, a metal box. Inside it, a reel-to-reel tape, a small notebook with Helen's initials, and a key. "She gave me this the night before they arrested her," Walter said. "Told me never to listen unless the world was ready to know." Jake held the tape like it was a heartbeat, the message. Later, in the living room, they connected the reel to an old player. Walter adjusted the knobs. The tape clicked, a moment of static, then Helen's voice, clear, calm, focused. "If you're hearing this, something has shifted. The game has changed." She didn't name names. She didn't rant. She simply told her side. "I did what I was trained to do, protect the truth. And for that, I was erased. But I'm still here. And if this voice still matters, then let it be the start of remembering what they tried to forget." Jake felt his breath catch. Walter turned off the tape. "You have to share it," he said. Jake nodded. "I will, but carefully, like a whisper between souls." The interview. The train ride back felt different. He wasn't just returning from a visit with an old man by the marsh. He was carrying something now. A responsibility, a voice, a truth too long buried. Helen had given Jake a key, not just a literal one, but a key to her soul, to her silence, to the reason her name had been spoken in whispers. Or not at all. Back in the city, he took a walk through her neighborhood. Everything looked the same. The kids playing basketball in the alley, the neighbor watering her garden, the corner store with its peeling red awning. But Jake had changed, and so had the way he looked at the world, the journalist. He didn't go to the press immediately. He started with someone he trusted, Nia Ramirez, an independent investigative journalist with a reputation for chasing the stories no one else would touch. Jake had known her in college. She once wrote a piece on Cold War intelligence leaks that nearly got her expelled. When he called, she answered on the first ring. "Jake, it's been years. What's going on?" "I have a story," he said. "Everyone does." "No," Jake whispered. "This one was never supposed to be found." The meeting. They met in a small cafe in the old part of town. Nia wore her usual black leather jacket and sharp eyes. She listened in silence as Jake laid out Helen's story, the files, the coded letters, and finally the tape. He had copied it to a secure drive. And he let it play, right there between them, in a booth with chipped formica and the scent of burnt espresso. Nia didn't blink. She didn't interrupt. When the tape ended, she leaned back. "Jake, if this is real, then it's the kind of thing people kill to keep quiet." "It is real," he said. "And you're ready for what happens if we publish?" Jake hesitated, then nodded. "She asked me to. I owe her that." The dossier. Nia took the files home, digitized the pages, ran background checks. She found confirmation in places Jake had never thought to look. Embassy logs, unclassified memos, oral histories archived in quiet libraries. Piece by piece, Helen's life was being stitched back together. But something else happened too. People started calling. An ex-operative from Prague, a former intelligence translator who once worked out of Cairo, a retired secretary from the Department of Defense. They all had the same message. "I knew Helen, but we were told to forget her." Now they wanted to remember. The warning. Then came the email, an unmarked account, no subject line, just one sentence. Some stories were buried for a reason. Jake read it twice. He didn't show it to Naya. He didn't tell Walter either. He simply stared at the screen and whispered to himself, "Not anymore." Between light and shadow. They prepared the piece. But Naya didn't want it to run in a major outlet. Too many eyes, too many filters. Instead, she built a small digital exhibit, an interactive archive called the Helen Files. It was clean, elegant, verified. It wasn't about scandal. It was about remembrance, a way to restore Helen's dignity without turning her into a headline. Jake wrote the introduction. He didn't sign it. It wasn't about him. It began like this. She lived on our street. She smiled at our children. She fed the pigeons at the square. But before all that, she saved lives and then lost her own, piece by piece in silence. This is not a tribute. It's a truth long overdue. The reaction. When the Helen Files launched, it didn't go viral. It went quietly viral. People didn't shout. They whispered, shared it in forums, bookmarked it in newsletters. Teachers sent it to students. Old agents passed it to each other like a secret handshake. And within a week, Helen's story had been read in 19 countries. Letters poured in. Some were from people she had helped, others from those who had been silenced like her. Jake read each one. He kept them in a box marked simply, Truth. The street remembers. It began with a chair, a simple wooden chair, placed on the sidewalk where Helen used to sit every morning. Jake brought it from her backyard, sanded it, repainted it in soft blue, the color of calm, the color of memory. He placed it there quietly, just after dawn. No sign, no explanation, just a chair and a single white rose on the seat. By noon, someone had left a small photograph beneath the rose, Helen in her garden, waving to someone out of frame. By the next morning, the chair had turned into something else entirely, the memorial that built itself. Someone added a handwritten note. She told me stories when I was 6. Then came a drawing from a child, then a candle, then another. Soon the chair was surrounded by tokens, memories made visible, echoes of a life finally acknowledged. Jake didn't organize it. No one did. It was as if the neighborhood remembered itself. The community speaks. A week later, Jake stood before a small crowd in the park. Nia was there, holding her camera but not filming. Walter sat in the front row, quiet and proud. Neighbors gathered, some holding programs printed at home. Others simply came with hands in pockets and hearts open. Jake cleared his throat, spoke without a microphone. I didn't know Helen very well, not at first. But I know what silence looks like. I know what fear does to memory, and I know what it means when someone chooses to tell the truth, even if they don't live to see it heard. He paused. She wasn't just the old woman at the corner. She was a daughter, a fighter, a witness, and in her own quiet way, a guardian of something most of us forget, that every face you pass might carry a story deeper than you could imagine. A name restored. Thanks to Nia's work and the response from around the world, a motion was filed in court, a formal exoneration. It passed unanimously. Helen Rothstein was no longer a criminal in the eyes of the state. Her file, once stamped in red, was marked with a single word, cleared. Jake framed a copy, hung it in the local library, right above the reading nook where Helen used to sit, decades ago. The letter that came late. One morning, months later, Jake received a small envelope, no return address. Inside was a photograph. Helen, young, maybe 20, wearing a beret, smiling beside a man in uniform. On the back, written in faded ink, Vienna, 1947, we were free. H. Jake stared at it for a long time, then placed it in the box with the others. The box called Truth. The invisible lives. The story of Helen wasn't unique. That's what made it so powerful. Because around us, In quiet homes, in long park benches, in small apartments above bakeries, there are lives like hers, hidden, unspoken, forgotten, but still beating, still carrying meaning. Sometimes history doesn't come in textbooks. It comes in whispers, in broken photo frames, in boxes that no one dares open, in people we pass every day without knowing what they've lived through. If this story moved you, share it. Because someone in your neighborhood, your building, your own family might be carrying something untold. Let's not wait for silence to speak louder than truth. Subscribe to Hidden Past for more real stories of lives that were almost lost to time. And remember, the quietest voices often have the most powerful echoes.